He thought his office was empty, until a terrified little girl whispered, "Please don't let her take me." What Adrian Vale didn't know was that the woman coming for her carried secrets darker than any boardroom deal. The city lights glowed against the glass walls, 1,000 tiny reflections dancing across the polished floor as Adrian Vale stepped into his office. It was late, the kind of late when the building felt like it belonged to him alone, quiet, except for the faint hum of electronics and the distant whir of the elevator descending. He loosened his tie, set his phone on the desk, and was about to open his laptop when he noticed something unusual. A soft shuffle, barely there, came from behind the wide mahogany desk. At first he thought it might be the air system kicking on, or a draft rattling a paper. But then he saw it, a small shadow moving where there should have been none. His posture stiffened. Security in this building was airtight. No one just wandered into his office. He stepped around the desk slowly, not wanting to startle whoever or whatever was there. That was when he saw her. A girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, huddled on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, a worn backpack clutched tightly in her arms. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair tangled, and her shoes scuffed to the point of tearing. She looked up at him with wide eyes that shimmered under the warm office light, fear and defiance mixing in their depths. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Adrian felt a dozen questions fighting for space in his mind. But before he could voice a single one, she spoke. Her voice was small but urgent, the kind of tone that carried truth, because it had no time for anything else. "Please don't let her take me." The words landed with the weight of something serious, something dangerous. Adrian crouched down, trying to make himself less imposing, though he knew he was still a stranger to her. "Who?" he asked gently. Her fingers tightened on the backpack until her knuckles turned pale. She shook her head as if saying the name would make it real. "She's coming. She was right behind me." Adrian glanced toward the office door, then at the security feed on his desk monitor. No one was visible in the hallway outside. Still, something about the way the girl trembled made him trust her fear more than his cameras. "You're safe here," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he had fully decided what he meant by them. He didn't know who she was or how she'd gotten past security, but he knew she was scared enough to seek shelter in the office of a man she didn't know. That wasn't something you did for no reason. She eyed him warily, as if trying to decide if he could be trusted. The silence between them stretched, filled with the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Finally she whispered, "Promise?" Adrian nodded. "I promise." Her shoulders sagged slightly, the first sign of relief he had seen, but her grip on the backpack never loosened. He realized then that whatever story had brought her here, it was going to change his night, maybe even his life. Adrian was still kneeling beside the girl when his desk phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet like a warning. He stood slowly, keeping his eyes on her, and picked up the receiver. It was Bennett, the head of his security team, speaking in the calm but clipped tone he used when something was wrong. There was a woman in the lobby, demanding to come up, saying the child in Adrian's office was her daughter. She had identification, legal papers, and a voice that carried enough authority to make the night staff uneasy. Adrian's gaze flicked to the girl. Her fingers dug into her backpack, and her eyes widened with pure panic. She shook her head hard, mouthing no, no, no. "Hold her there," Adrian told Bennett. "Do not let her upstairs." He ended the call and crossed to his desk, pulling up the live security feed on his computer. The high-definition cameras showed the marble-floored lobby below, mostly empty except for the night guard and the woman in question. She stood perfectly still, her coat draped over one arm, her posture confident in a way that felt rehearsed. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup precise, and her clothes expensive but understated. At first glance, she looked like any professional woman dealing with an urgent matter. But Adrian's eyes, trained over years of reading people in high-stakes negotiations, caught what others might miss. It was in her eyes. Not the frantic shine of a worried parent, but the steady, calculating coldness of someone measuring every move. They didn't soften when she spoke, not even when she smiled at the guard. Her mouth moved in polite shapes, but her eyes stayed hard, scanning the room as if she were assessing threats and exits. The girl's voice broke his focus. She lies about everything. Adrian turned toward her. Do you know her name? The girl hesitated, then whispered, Carla. On the feed, the woman handed the guard a folder, her nails a perfect glossy red. Adrian could imagine the smooth tone she was using, the way she would spin her words to make herself sound reasonable, even benevolent. He had met people like her before, people who could talk their way into anything if you didn't look too closely. Something in his chest tightened. If this were just a custody dispute, there would be emotion in her eyes. There would be a trace of fear for the child's well-being. This was different. She wasn't here for a reunion. She was here for possession. He glanced back at the girl, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, her backpack still clutched to her chest like armor. You're safe, he said again, more firmly this time. Down in the lobby, Carla looked up at the security camera, as if she knew he was watching. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the lens, and Adrian felt the weight of a silent challenge. She expected to get what she wanted. He had a feeling she wasn't used to being told no. Adrian stepped away from the desk and crouched down again, careful not to make any sudden movements. The girl was pressed into the corner beneath his desk, her knees tucked tightly to her chest, her eyes darting between him and the door, as though she expected someone to burst through at any moment. He kept his voice calm, the way he did in tense boardroom negotiations when the wrong tone could ruin everything. What's your name? He asked quietly. She hesitated, then said, Lila, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. Lila, he repeated, as if testing the shape of the name, letting her know he'd heard her. I'm Adrian. This is my office. No one is going to hurt you here. Her fingers tightened on the straps of her backpack, the worn fabric pulling at the seams. She's going to come, Lila whispered. She always finds me. Adrian glanced toward the door, remembering the cold look in the woman's eyes on the lobby camera. He reached for the phone on his desk without standing up, keeping his eyes on Lila as he called security. Bennett, he said when the guard answered, keep the woman downstairs. Don't let her up here until I say otherwise. Understood, came the reply, firm and immediate. Adrian set the phone down and focused on the girl again. She's not coming up, he said. Not tonight. Lila shook her head, the fear in her face not softening at his words. You don't know her, she said, her voice trembling but certain. She makes people believe her. She'll tell you things, and you'll think she's telling the truth, but she's not. Her certainty struck him. This wasn't the exaggerated fear of a child in trouble. It was the calm knowledge of someone who had learned hard lessons too young. He had met liars like that before. People who built entire identities out of charm and precision. People who could ruin you before you realized you'd trusted the wrong person. Then I won't believe her, he said, and meant it. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the hum of the city outside filling the silence. Adrian could see she wasn't ready to move from her spot, and he didn't push her. Instead, he slid down to sit cross-legged a few feet away, lowering himself to her level. He didn't ask more questions yet, knowing she would tell him what she wanted to when she was ready. I have water in the mini-fridge, he said after a while. And sandwiches from earlier. You can stay here as long as you want, Lila. No one will touch you. She studied him, as if weighing the truth in his words. Finally, she gave the smallest nod, still clutching her backpack, but breathing a little slower. Adrian knew he didn't understand the whole situation yet, but one thing was clear. Until he did, that woman downstairs was not getting anywhere near this girl. Adrian moved slowly, not wanting to break the fragile calm that had settled over the room. He stood and walked to the small kitchenette, tucked into the corner of his office, glancing back to make sure Lila was still there. She hadn't moved from her spot under the desk, but her eyes followed him, wary and watchful. He filled a mug with milk, set it in the microwave, and found the tin of cocoa powder Josephine always kept stocked for late nights. The warm, rich smell filled the air as he stirred it in, adding a little more sugar than usual without thinking. When he returned, he crouched again and held the mug toward her. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she slid forward on her knees and took it carefully with both hands. The steam curled in the air between them as she took a small sip. He could see the tension in her shoulders ease, just slightly. "Better?" he asked. She gave the smallest nod, still focused on the mug. "You said she's not your mother," Adrian prompted gently. "Then who is she?" Lila's eyes flicked up to his before darting away. "She's my mom's friend," she said, the word friend carrying none of its usual warmth. "She came after my mom left. Said she was going to take care of me." Adrian kept his expression neutral, though something in his chest tightened. "And did she?" Lila shook her head. "She kept me in this room. Said it was for my own good. The window was nailed shut, the door locked from the outside. She only let me out when she needed me to do something for her." "What kind of something?" Lila hesitated, her fingers tightening on the mug. "Carry packages, go to places and give people envelopes, smile and say thank you. She said if I did what she told me, she'd tell my mom where I was." Adrian felt a flicker of anger, but he kept his voice steady. "And your mom? You haven't seen her?" Her head dropped. "Not since the night she left. She told me to wait for her, that she'd come back, but she didn't." He leaned back slightly, giving her space. "Do you know where she went?" "No," Lila whispered, "but I think she was scared. I heard her crying on the phone once, telling someone she didn't have much time." The pieces fell into place slowly in Adrian's mind. Not enough to see the whole picture, but enough to know this was no simple misunderstanding. The woman downstairs wasn't here to protect Lila. She was here to reclaim control. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "As long as you're here, no one can lock you in any room again." Lila looked up at him then, searching his face for any hint of doubt. When she seemed to find none, she took another sip of cocoa, and for the first time since he'd seen her, her shoulders lowered just a little more. Adrian sat back in his chair, watching Lila as she cradled the mug in her small hands. The glow from the desk lamp softened her features, but it couldn't hide the tension in her jaw or the way her eyes kept flicking toward the door, as if she expected it to burst open at any second. He had seen fear before, in the eyes of people about to lose everything in a deal gone wrong. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that came from living too long in the shadow of someone else's control. Something about it pulled at him, stirring a part of himself he usually kept locked away. He could remember his own nights like that, long ago, when he was barely older than Lila. The sharp click of a door locking, the muffled sound of voices arguing in the next room, the hollow quiet that came when you realized no one was coming to open that door for you. He had buried those memories deep under years of work and success, but they rose now, uninvited, and made it impossible to look at her as just a stranger who had stumbled into his office. She took another sip of cocoa and set the mug carefully on the desk, still within her reach. "You really won't let her come up?" she asked, her voice hesitant, as if she still couldn't quite believe it. "I told you I wouldn't," he said, leaning forward so she could see he meant it. "And I keep my word." Her gaze searched his face, as if weighing the truth of it. Adrian realized he wanted her to believe him more than he'd wanted to win any negotiation in his life. He didn't know the full story yet, didn't know where her mother was, or why this so-called friend had taken her. But he knew enough. Enough to decide that until he had answers, she wasn't going anywhere. A quiet determination settled over him. He had the resources to keep her safe. An office that could be locked down tighter than a bank vault. Security staff who owed him their loyalty. And a network of contacts who could find information where others couldn't. More than that, he had the will. Success had taught him to fight for what was his, but this was different. This wasn't about profit or reputation. This was about a child who had walked into his world with nothing but a backpack and a plea for help. He stood and crossed to the phone again, giving Bennett new instructions. The woman in the lobby was to be kept there, no exceptions, and the police were not to be called yet. Not until he knew which story they would believe. He could feel Lila watching him, and when he hung up and turned back to her, she was sitting a little straighter. "You're safe here," he said again. This time, not as reassurance, but as a promise. And in his mind, it was already a vow he intended to keep, no matter what it cost. Adrian picked up his phone and scrolled to Marcus's number. His head of security had been with him for years, a man who valued discretion as much as efficiency. When Marcus answered, Adrian kept his voice low, aware of how intently Lila's eyes were on him. He explained that he needed a full background check on a woman named Carla, possibly using other aliases, and that she was currently in the building's lobby. He also asked Marcus to dig into any recent missing persons reports involving a girl named Lila, around 8 or 9 years old, and to check for any connection between Carla and the girl's real mother. Marcus didn't waste time with questions, only promised to call back as soon as he had results. Adrian set the phone down and turned his attention to Lila, who was still curled up in the corner under the desk, her backpack close at her side. He crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. "I need to ask you a few questions," he said gently. "Not to scare you, but so I can help you." She gave a tiny nod, her expression serious. "What's your full name?" he asked. "Lila Ward," she said without hesitation. "And your mother's name?" "Emily Ward." "Do you know where you lived with her?" "In a small yellow house on Brookhaven Street," she replied, her voice steady. "Number 23. There was a big oak tree in the front yard, and a blue mailbox with the flag bent down." Adrian noticed the detail in her answer. Children making up stories often reached for vague images, but Lila's memory was specific, grounded in things that sounded real. "When did you last see your mother?" Her eyes flickered with something, pain, maybe, but her voice didn't waver. 3 months ago. She left at night. She told me to stay in bed and not come out. I heard her talking on the phone. She said she was in trouble and needed to leave for a while. She promised she'd come back for me. And Carla? She came the next morning. Said my mom had sent her. Said I was going to stay with her until my mom got back. Adrian asked about the room Lila had been kept in, about the packages and errands she'd been made to run, about the people she'd seen with Carla. Her answers came quickly, with clear descriptions, what they wore, what they drove, even the smells of the places she'd been taken. It was far too consistent to be a fabrication. He leaned back, studying her. "You remember a lot," he said. Lila shrugged slightly. "I have to. If I forget, I can't tell my mom when she comes back." Something in her words tightened his resolve. This was no child spinning a wild tale. This was a girl holding on to facts like lifelines. And until he had every piece of the truth, Adrian knew he wasn't letting her out of his sight. The call from Marcus came sooner than Adrian expected. He stepped away from the desk so Lila wouldn't hear the full conversation, though her eyes followed him the whole way. Marcus's voice was low, but edged with the kind of tension that told Adrian this was worse than they'd imagined. The woman in the lobby was Carla Denton, 42 years old, multiple past addresses across 3 states, and a long list of small businesses she had opened and closed under different names. On paper, she looked like someone who simply couldn't settle down. But Marcus had dug deeper. "She's been investigated before," Marcus said, "but most of the cases were sealed. The pattern is consistent. She takes in foster children, sometimes through official channels, sometimes not, and somehow ends up collecting state checks while the kids barely get the basics. When the children disappear from her care, she claims they went back to their biological families or were transferred to other foster homes. The files don't say where they really went. Adrian's jaw tightened. Any convictions? Nothing that stuck. She's careful. She knows how to stay just inside the line of what can be proven. But there's more. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then added, I found a civil suit from 8 years ago. A woman claimed Carla kept her daughter from her for nearly a year by moving from place to place, using fake addresses and names. The case disappeared from the record before trial. Settlement, maybe, or something else. Adrian glanced toward the desk, where Lila sat cross-legged, tracing the rim of her cocoa mug with her finger. She looked small, but not fragile. There was a steadiness to her that made him think of someone who had been holding herself up for too long. Anything on her connection to Emily Ward? Adrian asked. Not yet, Marcus replied, but I'm working on it. If there's a link, it's buried. Given her history, I wouldn't be surprised if she intercepted the mother somehow. She's done it before, stepping in at moments of crisis, making herself look like the solution, then taking control of the child for her own gain. Adrian felt the weight of the words settle over him. This was no custody dispute. This was a predator who had learned how to exploit systems meant to protect children. He didn't need to see the sealed court records to know they would hint at worse: neglect, coercion, maybe even trafficking. Keep digging, Adrian said. I want everything. Every alias, every address, every person she's been connected to. And Marcus, make sure she doesn't leave the building. He ended the call and returned to Lila, who looked at him as if trying to read his face for answers. He crouched down again, meeting her eyes. You were right, he said softly. She's done this before, and she's not going to do it to you again. For the first time since she'd spoken to him, Lila's lips twitched into the smallest hint of a smile, as if she dared to believe him. Adrian's phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something told him to answer. The moment he picked up, a smooth female voice filled his ear, low and deliberate, with just enough edge to mask a threat under the pretense of politeness. Mr. Vale, she began, as though they were old acquaintances, I believe you have something that belongs to me. Or rather, someone. Adrian didn't reply right away. He glanced toward Lila, who was pretending to be focused on the city lights beyond the glass, but was clearly listening. You're talking about Lila, he said finally. Carla's tone tightened. I'm talking about my daughter. She's not your daughter, he said flatly. There was a pause, and then the smile in her voice returned, though it was colder now. I don't know what she's told you, but you've made a serious mistake. If you don't return her to me immediately, I'll have no choice but to inform the authorities and the press. A wealthy man like you, alone in his office late at night, harboring a child who doesn't belong to him, imagine how that will look on tomorrow's headlines. Adrian let her words hang in the air. She wasn't shouting, wasn't emotional. She was confident, calm, certain she could control the narrative. He recognized the style. This wasn't her first attempt at manipulating someone into giving her what she wanted. You've played this game before, he said, keeping his voice even. I know how to protect what's mine, she replied smoothly. The truth doesn't matter to most people, Mr. Vale. Perception does. And I'm very good at shaping perception. Adrian leaned back in his chair, keeping his tone as neutral as possible. If you're as good as you say, you should know that calling me directly was a mistake, because now I have your voice, your threats, and I have witnesses. For the first time, there was the faintest crack in her composure. I'm offering you a chance to avoid a very messy situation, she said, the warmth in her voice turning brittle. I'd take it if I were you. I'm not you, he said, and I'm not giving her back to you. Her silence stretched just long enough to feel deliberate. You'll regret this, she said finally. Then the line went dead. Adrian set the phone down slowly. Lila was watching him now, her small face pale but intent. Was that her? She asked. Yes, he said. What did she say? He studied her for a moment, then replied, She tried to scare me into sending you back, but it didn't work. Lila hugged her backpack tighter, but this time it seemed less like fear and more like resolve. She always thinks she can scare people, she said softly. She's wrong. Adrian knew then that the battle had shifted. Carla wasn't just dangerous, she was experienced. But so was he, and he wasn't planning on losing. The office felt heavier after Carla's call, as if her voice had left something lingering in the air. Adrian sat at his desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his mind running through every possible outcome. He knew exactly how quickly a story could spread, how easily a headline could be twisted, how even an accusation without proof could stain a reputation. One phone call from Carla to the wrong person, and the press could turn him into a villain before the truth had a chance to breathe. He looked over at Lila, still sitting on the floor near the desk, her backpack close and her eyes fixed on him like she was trying to guess his next move. She didn't speak, but he could feel the weight of her silence. She knew, in her own way, that he was deciding something important. Legally, the safest choice was to call the police, hand her over, and let the system figure it out. That was what most people would expect him to do. It would be clean, quick, and out of his hands. But as he thought about the sealed records Marcus had mentioned, about Carla's confident threats, and about the sharp fear in Lila's eyes when she spoke of being locked away, he knew handing her over would be anything but safe for her. He had been in rooms where powerful people made choices based solely on self-preservation, where moral responsibility was an afterthought. He had told himself he wasn't one of them. But now was the moment to prove it. If he let her go, he would be walking away from a child who had trusted him enough to run to him for help. And if she disappeared into Carla's hands again, there was no guarantee he would ever see her alive and free after tonight. The hum of the city outside seemed louder, the neon glow painting long shapes on the glass walls. Adrian imagined the fallout if he kept her here. A legal battle, questions from the police, the press camping outside his building. He imagined investors getting nervous, partnerships slipping away, his name dragged into a story that wasn't his to begin with. But none of that outweighed the thought of her being taken back to a locked room by someone who saw her as property. He made the decision without fanfare. He reached for the phone and called Bennett. "The girl stays with me tonight," he said firmly. "Make sure no one comes up and no one leaves with her." When he hung up, he turned to Lila. She looked at him with a mix of hope and disbelief. "You're not going to let her take me?" she asked. "No," he said, and he meant it in a way that felt final. "You're safe here, at least for tonight." Her shoulders relaxed for the first time since he had found her, and she pulled her backpack into her lap like it was the most precious thing she owned. Adrian knew the trouble was only beginning, but the decision felt right. Some risks were worth taking. This was one of them. Adrian had been working in silence for nearly an hour, answering a few urgent emails while keeping one ear open for any sound from Lila. She had moved from the floor to the couch in the corner, curled up with her knees to her chest. Every so often, she would glance at him, as if checking to see if he was still there. When he finally set his laptop aside, she straightened a little, her fingers tracing the zipper of her worn backpack. "I have something," she said quietly, almost like she was afraid the words would break if she spoke too loudly. Adrian leaned forward. "What is it?" She unzipped the backpack and reached inside, digging past a few crumpled clothes and a small stuffed animal that had seen better days. From a hidden pocket in the lining, she pulled out a folded piece of paper, the edges worn and soft from being handled too often. She hesitated before handing it over, her small fingers brushing his as she let go. "It's from my mom," she said. "I wasn't supposed to show anyone unless I thought they could really help." Adrian unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was rushed, slanting unevenly across the page, as if it had been written in a moment where time was short and fear was close. The ink had smudged in a few places, but the words were still clear enough to read. Whoever finds Lila, please, I'm begging you, keep her away from Carla Denton. She is dangerous. I will come back for my daughter as soon as I can. Until then, don't let her take her. Trust no one Carla sends. There was no signature, only the name Emily scrawled at the bottom, as if the writer had barely managed to finish before she had to run. Adrian read the note twice, his mind piecing together the truth it confirmed. Emily Ward hadn't abandoned her daughter. She had left her with the desperate hope someone would protect her. And Carla wasn't just someone with questionable intentions. She was the exact person Emily feared most. When did she give you this? Adrian asked. The night she left, Lila said. She hugged me really tight and told me to keep it safe. She said if Carla found it, she'd never let me go. Adrian folded the paper and handed it back. But Lila shook her head. You keep it. You'll know what to do with it better than me. He slipped the note into the inside pocket of his jacket, feeling the weight of it against his chest. It wasn't just paper, it was proof. Proof that Emily had trusted a stranger more than the system. Proof that Adrian's choice to keep Lila tonight was the right one. You did the right thing showing me this, he told her. Lila gave a small nod, her eyes steady on his. I knew you wouldn't believe her, she said, meaning Carla. Adrian sat back, the note burning like a promise in his pocket. He knew now there was no going back. This wasn't about one night of safety anymore. This was about keeping her safe until her mother returned, or until he found her himself. Adrian waited until Lila had settled back onto the couch before stepping toward the far corner of his office, lowering his voice as he scrolled through his contacts. His thumb paused over Josephine's name. She had been with him for over a decade, managing his estate with quiet precision, the kind of woman who noticed things before anyone else did. She had seen him through business crises and personal storms, and he trusted her in ways he trusted very few people. When she answered, her voice was steady as always. Mr. Vale, I need you to come to the office, Adrian said. Bring the black SUV. Use the service entrance. Don't let anyone see you. There's a child here. Her name is Lila. She's in danger, and I want her taken to the residence until I can figure this out. No one, and I mean no one, is to know she's there. Josephine didn't ask questions, which was exactly why he had called her. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she replied, and hung up. Adrian turned back to Lila. She was watching him carefully, her small fingers gripping the strap of her backpack. Someone's coming to help, he told her. She's a friend of mine, and she's going to make sure you have a safe place to stay tonight. Lila's eyes narrowed slightly, not in distrust, but in the cautious way of someone who had been promised safety before, and had learned it was rarely real. Can I trust her? She asked. Yes, Adrian said without hesitation. She's helped me for years. She doesn't take sides with people who lie. True to her word, Josephine arrived just under 20 minutes later. Adrian met her at the service elevator, a tall figure in a dark coat, her silver hair pulled back, her expression calm but alert. She stepped into the office with the quiet authority of someone who belonged there. Lila sat up straighter when she saw her, her posture tense, until Josephine crossed the room and crouched so they were eye level. Hello, Lila, she said, her tone gentle but steady. I hear you've had a rough night. We're going to get you somewhere warm and safe. Something in her voice seemed to cut through Lila's guarded shell. The girl nodded once, her shoulders loosening just a fraction. She let Josephine take her coat and help her into it, the way one might with a younger child, without making her feel small. Adrian watched the exchange, noting how quickly Josephine had earned Lila's trust. She didn't speak to her like she was fragile or broken. She spoke to her like she mattered. Before they left, Josephine looked back at him. I'll call once we're at the house, she said. Don't worry, Mr. Vale, she'll be fine with me. As the elevator doors closed on them, Adrian felt some of the tension in his chest ease. He knew Lila was safer now than she had been in months, maybe years. And he also knew that Carla had just lost the first battle without even realizing it. The rain had started just before dawn, a slow, steady drizzle that left the city streets slick and gleaming. Adrian was at his desk at the private residence, sipping black coffee and scanning through the overnight reports from Marcus, when the call came from the front gate. The security guard's voice was tight. Carla Denton was outside. She wasn't alone. Adrian moved to the monitor and switched the feed to the gate camera. Carla stood beside a man in a sharp gray suit, his hair perfectly combed despite the damp air. He carried a sleek leather briefcase, the kind lawyers like to use for dramatic effect. Carla was dressed as if for an important meeting, her expression composed but laced with the kind of satisfaction that told him she believed she was about to win. "They've brought papers," the guard said. "Says it's proof she has custody." Adrian studied the screen. He could almost predict her play. She would wave those papers like a shield, claim legal authority, and expect him to hand Lila over without question. But Marcus was close to completing the background check. He had hinted at something serious, something that would make Carla's position crumble if they could get it in writing. Adrian just needed more time. "Keep the gates closed," he told the guard. "Tell them I'll meet them in the outer reception area. No one comes onto the property without my permission." Minutes later, he stepped into the reception hall just inside the gate. Carla smiled, as if they were old friends, her eyes flicking over his appearance, assessing. The lawyer stepped forward, holding out a folder. "Mr. Vale, my client has come to collect her daughter," he said smoothly. "Here is the documentation establishing her guardianship." Adrian took the folder, but didn't open it right away. "Interesting," he said, keeping his tone even. "Because, from what I've seen so far, your client's history with children doesn't exactly inspire confidence." The lawyer's eyes narrowed slightly, but Carla's expression didn't change. "You have no right to keep her," she said, her voice steady. "I can have the police here in minutes." "Go ahead," Adrian replied, finally flipping through the papers. The signatures were clean, the notary stamp crisp, but he'd been in enough boardroom battles to recognize a forged chain of documentation. He let the pages fall back into the folder. "These won't hold up in court," the lawyer bristled. "Are you refusing to comply with legal orders?" "I'm refusing to hand a child over until I'm certain she's safe," Adrian said. "And I'm certain she isn't with you." He could see the flicker of irritation in Carla's eyes, the smallest crack in her carefully maintained mask. She had expected this to be over in minutes, and now he was dragging it out. Somewhere inside the house, Lila was safe with Josephine, unaware of the confrontation at the gates. Adrian intended to keep it that way. He handed the folder back without another word, knowing every minute he stalled brought Marcus closer to delivering the proof that would end this game for good. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of settling wood. Adrian had been in his study for hours, pretending to focus on the contract drafts in front of him, but really just waiting for Marcus's late-night update. The clock on the wall had just clicked past 2 when he heard soft footsteps in the hallway, followed by the hesitant creak of the study door. Lila stood there in the dim light, her hair tangled from sleep, her eyes wide and unsettled. She clutched a blanket around her shoulders, her bare feet silent against the rug. "I had a bad dream," she said, her voice no louder than a whisper. Adrian set his pen down and motioned for her to come closer. She hesitated for a moment before crossing the room and climbing into the armchair across from his desk, tucking her feet under her. The blanket slipped a little, and he could see her hands trembling. "Do you want to tell me about it?" he asked gently. "It wasn't just a dream," she said after a moment. "It's something I remember." Her gaze dropped to her lap as she picked at the edge of the blanket. "It was when I was still with Carla. I wasn't supposed to be out of my room, but I woke up thirsty. I went to the kitchen to get water, and I heard her in the living room on the phone." Lila swallowed hard. She said she could sell me back once the heat died down, like I was something she could trade." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression steady for her sake. Sell you back to who? I don't know, Lila said. She didn't say a name, just that she had to wait until people stopped asking questions. Then she laughed and said it would be easy because I don't talk much. Her voice cracked on the last part, and she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Adrian leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Lila, I need you to know something, he said. You're not property. No one has the right to decide where you go or who you're with, except you and your mother. What she said, it's not just wrong, it's criminal. Lila's eyes flicked up to his, searching for doubt. But what if the police don't believe me? She's good at making people believe her. I believe you, Adrian said firmly. And Marcus will believe you. And once we have the right evidence, the police will have no choice. She took a shaky breath, as if the weight of what she'd said had been pressing on her for too long. I didn't want you to think I was making things up. I didn't tell anyone before because I didn't think it would matter. It matters, Adrian said. Everything you tell me matters. For the first time that night, she seemed lighter, as if saying the words had given her some of her strength back. And for Adrian, the quiet fury in his chest hardened into a promise. Carla wasn't just going to lose. She was going to be exposed for exactly what she was. The morning light was still soft when Adrian's phone rang, the kind of pale gold that made the house feel almost peaceful. Marcus's name lit the screen, and Adrian answered on the first ring. The voice on the other end carried the controlled urgency that told him this wasn't just an update, it was something important. I found her, Marcus said without preamble. Emily Ward, Lila's mother. Adrian straightened in his chair, his heart kicking once, hard. Where? She's been living under an alias in a small coastal town, 3 hours from here. She went into hiding about 3 months ago, right after leaving Lila. It wasn't abandonment. She was running from a man named Victor Kane. He's tied to organized crime, multiple charges over the years, nothing that's stuck. He's her ex, and from what I've been able to piece together, he's dangerous. Adrian's mind raced, trying to reconcile the picture of the woman in Lila's memories with the image Marcus was painting. And Carla? That's where it gets worse, Marcus said. Emily tried to reach Lila twice. Once by phone, once through a woman she trusted to deliver a message. Both times, the trail led straight to Carla Denton. It looks like Carla intercepted the calls and the message before they ever got to Lila. I think Emily still believes her daughter is somewhere safe. Maybe even with her. Adrian felt his jaw tighten. She has no idea? None. She's been careful about staying hidden, working odd jobs, paying cash, keeping off the grid, but she's been trying to find a way to come back, without Kane or his people following her. She's terrified they'll use Lila to get to her. Adrian glanced toward the hallway, where he could hear faint movement upstairs. Lila was awake, probably with Josephine in the kitchen, unaware that her mother's absence had never been a choice to leave her behind. Does Emily know where Carla is? No, Marcus said. She thinks Carla is an old friend she could trust. That trust is why she's in this mess. Adrian let the silence stretch for a moment as he thought about the note Lila had given him, the hurried handwriting, the plea to keep her away from Carla. Emily must have known something wasn't right in those final hours, even if she didn't know the full extent of Carla's game. What's our next step? Adrian asked. I can get to Emily today, Marcus said. If she's willing, I'll bring her here. But we'll have to be careful. If Kane's people are still watching her, we can't lead them straight to Lila. Adrian's mind was already turning over contingencies. Do it, and make sure no one follows you. When he ended the call, he sat for a long moment, staring out at the wet garden beyond the window. Lila's mother was alive, trying to find her, fighting her own battle in the shadows. And Carla, with her forged papers and calculated charm, had been standing in the way the entire time. Adrian knew then that this wasn't just about protecting Lila for tonight or tomorrow. It was about reuniting her with the one person who had been fighting for her all along. Adrian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the city skyline fade into the gray haze of late afternoon. The plan had been taking shape since Marcus's call that morning. They had enough now. More than enough. Phone records showing Carla's contact with known traffickers, intercepted messages about moving the girl, forged custody papers, even the note from Emily warning against her. It was a net that, once thrown, Carla wouldn't be able to slip through. Josephine had been quietly gathering her own evidence over the past days. Times Carla had appeared unannounced, names of people she had been seen meeting, even photographs from the security system at the estate. Everything was neat, catalogued, and ready to hand over. Marcus had used his contacts in law enforcement to find the right people to trust. Federal agents who wouldn't warn Carla or let the case disappear into paperwork. Now all that was left was to set the bait. Adrian called Carla himself. She answered on the second ring, her tone smooth, controlled, as if she had been expecting the call. He told her he was ready to resolve things, that Lila was asking questions he couldn't answer, that perhaps the simplest way forward was to hand her over quietly and without further public mess. Carla didn't hesitate. She agreed to meet within the hour. The location was chosen carefully, a neutral office building in the city, one with private conference rooms and discreet access points. To Carla, it would feel like a final negotiation. To Adrian, it was the stage for her downfall. The agents were already in place, dressed like tenants or building staff, stationed where they could move in without warning. When Adrian arrived, Marcus was waiting just outside the meeting room, his expression sharp with focus. "She's here," he murmured. "She came alone, or so it looks. We've got eyes on her car, but no backup spotted." Adrian nodded and stepped inside. Carla was seated at the far end of the polished table, the faintest smile playing at her lips. "Mr. Vale," she said warmly, as if they were about to discuss a merger rather than a child's future. He sat across from her, resting a folder on the table. "I have the papers you gave me," he said, "and I've reviewed them carefully." Carla's smile didn't falter, though her eyes flickered briefly toward the folder. "Then you know they're in order," she replied. Adrian leaned back, letting the silence stretch. "I also have phone logs, bank transfers, messages you'd probably prefer never saw the inside of a courtroom." Her expression hardened, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. "You wouldn't dare," she said. The door opened behind her, and two plainclothes agents stepped in, badges raised. Carla froze, the confidence draining from her face as they recited her rights. She turned toward Adrian, her voice low and venomous. "This isn't over." But as the agents led her out, Adrian knew it was. The trap had closed, and this time, she wasn't walking away. The conference room was colder than it should have been, the air thick with the quiet tension that always comes before something final. Adrian stood near the far wall, his arms loosely folded, while Carla sat at the table with the same calm poise she had worn since walking in. The folder of her forged custody papers lay untouched between them. She had no idea the real handover today wasn't Lila. It was her. Lila stood just behind Adrian, close enough that he could feel the light pressure of her small shoulder against his leg. Josephine had brought her in only minutes earlier, after the agents were in place. She hadn't wanted to come at first, but Adrian had told her she didn't have to speak, just watch, so she could see with her own eyes that Carla would not be coming for her again. Carla's eyes flicked to the child, and back to Adrian, her smile tightening. "You've made the right choice," she said, her voice smooth. "We can put all this unpleasantness behind us now." Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the door. At that moment, two plainclothes agents stepped inside, their presence shifting the room's energy in an instant. They didn't waste time. One presented identification, the other read out the charges clearly, each word deliberate: kidnapping, fraud, trafficking in minors. The last charge hung in the air like a blade. Carla's mask cracked. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if searching for the right lie and finding none. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, but one agent's hand was already on her arm. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, the smooth tone gone, replaced by a sharp, jagged edge. "You can't prove." "We can," the agent interrupted, his voice steady. "We have phone records, bank transfers, intercepted communications, sworn statements, and physical evidence tying you to multiple cases." Carla's gaze darted to Adrian, her eyes narrowing into something cold and dangerous. "You did this," she hissed. "I protected her," Adrian said simply. The agents moved her toward the door, their grip firm but controlled. As she passed, her stare locked on Lila, but the girl didn't flinch. She stepped closer to Adrian instead, her small hand slipping into his and holding tight. They watched in silence as Carla was led away, her voice echoing down the hall in a stream of threats and denials. The agent's footsteps faded, and the room felt lighter, as if something poisonous had finally been drawn out. Lila looked up at him, her fingers still gripping his. "She's not coming back, is she?" "No," Adrian said, his voice certain. "She's not coming back." For a moment, they stood together in the stillness, the weight of months of fear beginning to lift from her shoulders. Outside, the rain had stopped, and pale light spilled through the tall windows. Adrian tightened his hold on her hand, feeling her grip soften just enough to know she finally believed him. The fall of Carla Denton was complete, and with it came the first real breath of safety Lila had felt in far too long. The day Emily Ward arrived, the air at the estate felt charged, as if every room was holding its breath. Adrian stood by the front entrance with Josephine at his side, watching the black SUV pull through the gates. Marcus stepped out first, scanning the drive before opening the back door. A woman emerged slowly, her frame thin beneath a plain coat, her movements cautious, as if she was still expecting danger to be around the next corner. Emily's hair was a little longer than in the photo Adrian had seen, streaked with strands of silver that made her seem older than her years. Her eyes moved quickly over the house, the grounds, and finally to the doorway where Adrian stood. He could see the hesitation in her posture, the uncertainty of a mother who had been kept from her child for too long and didn't quite believe she would be allowed to see her now. Inside, Lila was pacing in the living room, clutching the same worn backpack she had been holding the night Adrian first found her. Josephine had told her her mother was coming, but Lila had said little, only nodding and keeping close to the windows, as if she could speed up the arrival by willing it. When Emily stepped through the door, Lila froze. The moment seemed to stretch impossibly long, just two pairs of eyes locking across a room, each searching the other for proof they were real. Then, Lila ran forward, the backpack dropping to the floor, her arms wrapping tight around her mother's waist. Emily dropped to her knees and held her daughter so tightly it was as if she was afraid she might disappear again. Her shoulders shook, and her face was buried in Lila's hair. Lila's small hands fisted into the back of her coat, her own tears spilling silently. Neither spoke for a long time. The room was filled only with the sounds of their breathing, uneven and heavy, and the faint hum of the heating system. When Emily finally pulled back enough to see her daughter's face, her hands cupped Lila's cheeks, as if she needed to memorize every feature all over again. "I'm so sorry," Emily whispered. "I tried to get to you. I tried every way I could." "I know," Lila said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I knew you didn't leave because you wanted to." Adrian stood quietly to the side, letting them have their moment. Emily looked up at him then, her eyes red, but filled with a kind of gratitude that didn't need many words. She rose, keeping one arm around Lila, and stepped toward him. "Thank you," she said, "for believing her, for believing a frightened child over someone who looked and sounded like she had all the answers. Most wouldn't have. "You didn't need to convince me," Adrian replied. "She did that herself." Emily's arm tightened around Lila, and Lila reached for Adrian's hand without letting go of her mother. For the first time since all this began, they were together, and together felt like the safest place in the world. The little white house sat at the end of a quiet street, its small garden lined with fresh flowers that hadn't been there a month ago. Adrian parked at the curb and took a moment to take it in, noting the way the windows were open to let in the spring air, the curtains moving softly in the breeze. It was modest, nothing like the glass towers he was used to, but it looked solid and safe. And that was the point. He had made sure of it. Emily opened the door before he could knock. She looked healthier than the day she arrived at his estate, the lines of exhaustion around her eyes easing into something lighter. There was still caution in her posture, but it no longer defined her. Lila appeared behind her, her hair loose and her smile quick, the kind of smile she hadn't worn easily when he first met her. Inside, the house smelled faintly of vanilla and something baking in the oven. The living room was warm and lived in, with mismatched furniture that somehow fit together perfectly. Lila's drawings were taped to one wall, and on the coffee table sat a photo in a simple frame. Lila and Emily together, both of them laughing, their arms looped around each other. They spent the afternoon talking over tea, Emily telling him about the job she had started at a local bookstore, Lila excitedly describing the new friends she had made at school. She spoke with an ease Adrian had not heard in her voice before, as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally been set down. Every so often, Emily's hand would rest on her daughter's shoulder, a small touch that said more than words. Adrian didn't mention the quiet financial help that had made this house possible, or the trust fund he had arranged in Lila's name. Emily knew he had helped, but she also knew he wouldn't make it a condition for their gratitude. What mattered to him was seeing them here, in a space that was theirs, far from the reach of anyone who might try to take it from them. As the afternoon light began to fade, Adrian stood to leave. Emily thanked him again, her voice low but steady, and he told her she didn't have to thank him anymore. This was their life now. He was halfway down the path to his car when he heard the front door open and quick footsteps behind him. Lila ran to him, stopping just short of colliding into his side. She looked up at him with an expression that was both earnest and certain. "You were the first person who didn't let her take me," she said. The words hit him harder than he expected. He rested a hand on her shoulder and managed a small smile. "I wasn't going to let anyone take you," he replied. Driving away, he realized that protecting her hadn't just saved her. It had changed him too, in ways he was still beginning to understand. She had reminded him that some battles were worth every risk, and that sometimes the choice to stand by someone could reshape an entire life. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like, and if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.